The movie begins with a divorced woman named Chung Lai Fong shopping for clothes. After making her purchases, she leaves the store. While walking down the streets, she notices a tortoise in distress in a nearby tank of water. It is flipped onto its back at another store. She brings this to the attention of the store owner, who confirms the tortoise's distress and helps it onto its stomach. As Chung prepares to leave, the owner offers her another tortoise for $45. Although she expresses interest in the first tortoise, he insists the second one is better. Chung, now unable to decline, stands there as she watches the man go into his store to retrieve a bag of tortoise food from inside. With her new purchases, a dress and a forced pet, Chung departs the store, helping a tortoise cost her another one. Chung Lai Fong steps into a vibrant plaza, surrounded by a picturesque scenery of people engrossed in their daily activities and businesses. The atmosphere is vibrant with buying and selling in full swing. Store owners are busily measuring out attires, carefully arranging them in an enticing display to catch the eyes of passers-by. Shoppers weave in and out of stores, which are stocked to the brim with an array of goods. The plaza is a hub of activity, filled with the gentle hum of commerce. Inside the bustling plaza, Chung meets with her boyfriend named Edward. They exchange warm smiles and pleasantries. Edward offers to help Chung with her cumbersome load, and she accepts. As they walk together, Edward asks about the tortoise perched in Chung's hands. Chung explains her earlier encounter of how she helped another tortoise and ended up having to buy this one. They arrive at Edward's office. Just then, Edward gets a call from a client and rushes inside immediately, abandoning Fong's dresses in his hands on a nearby counter. On the other side of things, a bride is testing out her wedding dress. Mrs. Chang walks in on her and is pleased to see how things are going with the soon-to-be bride. The bride, named Mabel, explains to Mrs. Chang that she is going on a diet for the dress. Yi, the stylist of the bride, also Chang's daughter, teases her mother that all brides must go on a diet before their wedding, as the law demands. The excited bride blushes at this, full of smiles and spirit. Mrs. Chang seizes the moment to tease her daughter, taunting her about being single. Her daughter quickly fires back, asking if marriage is so wonderful. Why are she and her husband always arguing? Mrs. Chang retorts that it's better to have someone to argue with than be all by yourself. Her daughter, fed up with the taunting, tells Mrs. Chang to give her a few years, slightly teasing that when her career takes off, she'll bring home 10 husbands for her to see. That's the spirit. As Yi and Mabel continue with testing the dress, Yi recommends another one for Mabel to try out. However, Mrs. Chang interrupts the recommendation, informing the two that a white wedding dress symbolizes the bride's virginity, while a pearly one, like Yi's suggestion, indicates otherwise. The bride and stylist are shocked by this revelation, surprised that the status of a bride's virginity is tied to her dress. Though Yi doesn't seem to care much about this revelation, the bride is willing to listen to Mrs. Chang's opinion, showing respect and acknowledging her wisdom as an elder. Meanwhile, outside, Edward is instructing Kyung to digitally alter a client named Mr. Ho's wedding certificate to remove divorced, fearing it may spark controversy among the elders. As Kyung gets to work, Edward steps away, and Fong hurriedly approaches Yi, expressing her concern about her own marriage certificate, worried it will reveal her divorcee status. Yi, who seems to be Fong's close friend, hushes her down. She says that Mabel is here. The both of them seem to know the bride-to-be quite closely, and there seems to be some unspoken tension in the air. Just then, Mabel emerges from trying on her dress inside and interrupts the conversation between the two. Fong curtly compliments the soon-to-be bride on her beauty before excusing herself, allowing Yi to assist her with any necessary dress adjustments. Mabel, curious, asks Yi where she lives, and the latter quickly tells her that she lives with her boyfriend. Mabel then inquires about Yi's plans for marriage, to which Yi casually replies that she'll get married whenever her boyfriend proposes. The woman is taken aback by Yi's nonchalant attitude. Later, Fong returns home and begins by ensuring her tortoise is comfortable in its tank. Just then, Fong's boyfriend's mother, Mrs. Yang, walks into the apartment, surprised to see Fong back from work early. Mrs. Yang's company, Kenneth, the owner of the flat, whom she introduces to Fong. After some small talk, Mrs. Yang shows Kenneth the issues in the apartment, such as leakages. As Kenneth inspects and takes pictures, he complains about having to renovate the same spot multiple times. Fong suggests that the recent renovation upstairs may have caused the problem, possibly drilling a hole in the pipe, which could be the source of the issue. Mrs. Yang disparages the building, calling it a saltwater building, and offers to purchase the apartment from Kenneth. Meanwhile, Fong informs her mother-in-law that she and Edward have found a new apartment they're interested in moving to. Undeterred, Mrs. Yang continues to pressure Kenneth to sell the apartment to her, but he requests time to think it over carefully before making a decision. Later that night, Fong shares with Edward her earlier encounter at the bridal shop with Mabel, mentioning that she, Mabel and Yi used to be best friends and roommates. Later, as they prepare for bed, Fong poses a seemingly random question to Edward. Would he be willing to marry a divorcee? Edward, trying to understand the context, assumes she's referring to Mabel, but Fong clarifies that she was just thinking about the client who needed a Photoshop for his marriage certificate. She then hypothetically asks if he would mind if she had been married previously. Instead of replying directly, he asks if she would mind, and she says no. Then Fong drops a bombshell on Edward, revealing that his mother is planning to buy the apartment from Kenneth. Edward is taken aback, but seems happy, thinking that if his mom buys the apartment, they won't need to find a new place. However, Fong is not thrilled about the idea, expressing her dislike for the building and the prospect of living with her mother-in-law. Edward tries to lighten the mood with jokes, but Fong is not having it. He attempts to be romantic, but that only irritates her more. Eventually, she relents, allowing him to cuddle her. As they embrace, Edward shares that his mother is still upset with him for not disclosing their cohabitation plans. He asks Fong for a solution, and when she says she has none, he suggests that maybe they should get married. The next day, Fong, still grappling with her concerns about being a divorcee, visits the office to inquire further. She asks the lady at the counter if divorcees are marked as divorced on their marriage certificates, and the lady confirms her fears. Fong requests that the details be omitted, but the lady directs her to the marriage registration office. Still at the counter, Fong asks the lady to verify her divorce status, and the lady asks for her ID. After reviewing it, the lady surprisingly informs Fong that there is no record of her divorce. Fong is left devastated, realizing she will have to go through a lengthy process to obtain the records of her divorce from the marriage registration office. Fong, frustrated and upset after her unsuccessful visit to the marriage registration office, heads home, ignoring Edward's concerned texts. As she walks alone in the night, she bumps into Yi, who notices her distress and asks what's wrong. Fong shares the shocking news that the agency botched her divorce proceedings, leaving her still technically married. Yi is taken aback by this revelation and offers to help her friend, starting by tracking down the mainlander involved in the divorce process. Just then, Edward's staff meets the two outside. He informs Fong that Edward has been looking for her, but Fong lets him know she had spoken to him already, and so he runs inside. As Yi leads Fong into the plaza, Fong wonders why a crowd has gathered and what's happening. Suddenly, the crowd erupts in cheers and applause as they spot Fong. The sea of people parts, revealing a dazzling display of lights and balloons, with a sign that reads, "Marry me," in bold letters. Fong is quite literally shocked after seeing the extravagant display clearly orchestrated by Edward. As the crowd's applause continues, Edward makes a grand entrance, descending the escalator with a stylish flair, bouquet in hand. He approaches Fong with a charming smile, presents her with the flowers, and begins his heartfelt speech. He declares his intention to make the most significant vows of his life to her, right there and then. He reminisces about their journey together, spanning over 7 years, and expresses his desire to spend a lifetime with her. The atmosphere is electric, filled with anticipation and emotion. Edward's words and romantic gestures have surely captured her attention, and the crowd's enthusiasm is palpable. Edward drops to one knee, pulls out a ring box, and asks Fong to be his wife. His eyes shine with hope and anticipation as he awaits her response. But Fong, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events and the weight of her unresolved divorce, becomes lost in thought. Her gaze wanders around the room, as if searching for an escape or a reality check. Time seems to slow down for her, and she's unable to utter a word. The crowd's excitement and Edward's eager expression only add to her distress, leaving her frozen in a mixture of emotions, torn between the past and the future. Edward, still hopeful for a response, takes matters into his own hands, gently pulling Fong's hands towards him and sliding the ring onto her finger. The crowd erupts in cheers and applause, assuming Fong's silence is a sign of joy and acceptance. But beneath the surface, Fong's emotions are in turmoil. As Edward leans in for a kiss, the crowd's chants and cheers only add to her disorientation. The countdown begins, and Edward, lost in the romance of the moment, deepens the kiss. Meanwhile, Fong's mind is a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, her heart still heavy with the weight of her unfinished divorce and the uncertainty of her future. The kiss, meant to be a celebratory seal of their love, instead feels like a suffocating embrace, leaving Fong lost and disconnected. The scene shifts to Mrs. Yan, Edward's mother, snapping a photo of the newly engaged couple, with Edward beaming with joy, as he's the only elated one about their union, while Fong's expression remains subdued. Edward enthusiastically promises to share the pictures with Fong, eager to showcase their bond on social media. However, Mrs. Yan's focus quickly turns to more traditional matters, as she requests a meeting with Fong's parents to discuss the dowry and wedding banquet details. Before departing, she emphasizes the importance of homemade meals, insisting that Fong learn to cook, despite Edward's offer to take on the task, having learned cooking skills during his time in the UK. Mrs. Yan's words carry a hint of disapproval, implying that Edward is unreliable and needs Fong's care. In the next scene, Fong is on the phone with someone. She's now focused on finalizing a one-sided divorce, inquiring about the duration of the process. The person on the phone expresses curiosity about her situation, wondering if her ex-husband's refusal to divorce led Fong to take this route. However, Fong just claims that her ex-husband vanished a long time ago, leaving her with no choice but to move forward with a one-sided divorce. Fong is asked about the circumstances of her marriage, and Fong reveals that it has been 10 years since the marriage. The individual informs Fong that desertion is a valid ground for a single-sided divorce petition, but cautions that it is a complex process with potential pitfalls and will likely take a minimum of 2 years. Fong is taken aback by the lengthy timeline. Just then, an urgent matter requires her attention, and she hastily ends the call. A client is disputing a $500 cleaning fee for a rented dress, claiming ignorance of the charge. To mitigate further issues, Fong offers to cover the cost. However, Mrs. Chang, showing empathy, suggests splitting the bill. Fong will pay $200, while the client will cover $300, thereby resolving the dispute. Fong sets to work on the dress, determined to remove the stubborn stain. However, Mrs. Chang is skeptical, doubting Fong's chances of success. She thinks that even baking soda couldn't lift that stain. Despite this, Fong persists, carefully treating the stain with a range of cleaning solutions, and eventually deciding to patch the dress, hoping to restore the dress to its former glory. Meanwhile, Edward engages with a client couple, inquiring about their first meeting. The woman launches into a narrative, but her partner quickly contradicts her, exposing inaccuracies in her story. She alleges having brought wine to his residence after work, but he denies this ever happening, stating she never brought him wine after work. Edward, sensing a potentially explosive situation, promptly intervenes, attempting to placate the couple and prevent further escalation. Back on the other hand, Fong confides in Yi about her divorce proceedings, sharing the lengthy 2-year timeline for a one-sided petition. Yi seems unconcerned, suggesting Fong can wait it out and eventually inform Edward. However, Fong drops a bombshell, revealing a long-held secret. She entered a sham marriage with a mainlander a decade ago. Desperate to escape her parents' home due to financial constraints, Fong had turned to Yi for advice, who introduced her to the concept of lucrative, no-strings-attached sham marriages. The next day, she goes looking through the papers for a name, Yang Shuwei. Edward sneaks up on her, inquiring what she's doing. She lies, telling him that she's looking up stories. The carefree man just tells her to look up stories online, and then proceeds to grab her hands as they walk side by side. Sometimes later, back at work, Edward struggles to create a romantic short film for the couple, hindered by their palpable lack of chemistry. Meanwhile, Fong visits a real estate agent to inquire about available flats and their prices. After the conversation, she heads to the plaza, stepping onto an escalator to reach the next floor. As she ascends, she suddenly finds herself face-to-face with Yang Shuwei, the very person she had been searching for earlier. Yang Shuwei expresses his delight at finally meeting Fong, and she promptly requests a divorce. He agrees, but only after she assists him in obtaining a one-way permit. Fong pleads with him, revealing her upcoming marriage, but Yang counters with his own needs, criticizing her for entering a sham marriage despite now seeking a genuine one. Fong defends herself, explaining that marriage wasn't in her plans at the time. With much to consider, Fong tells Yang she needs to discuss the situation with Edward first. Later at home, Fong attempts to casually mention to Edward her idea of getting married in 2 years, but he surprises her with his mother's expectation of a wedding by next September. Fong's anxiety deepens as Edward shares more of his mother's plans, including a banquet with her family, which requires Fong to discuss the details with her parents. This news leaves Fong devastated. The scene shifts to a dimly lit room, where Fong is on a tense phone call with her father. His tone is apathetic, and he seems unenthusiastic about hearing from her. Fong shares the news of her upcoming marriage, initially suggesting a 2-year timeline, but her father questions the purpose of informing him so far in advance. When Fong mentions the possibility of the wedding being held as early as next September, her father's response is curt, implying that she must be eager to see them if she's considering such an early date. The conversation is strained, revealing a sense of detachment and emotional distance between Fong and her father. Fong and Yang meet again, this time to create a facade of their supposed decade-long relationship by taking photos together. However, Fong is skeptical about the authenticity of these pictures, pointing out that they won't appear to be 10 years old. As they continue taking photos, their conversation turns into a debate. Yang criticizes Fong for hastily entering a sham marriage, while Fong accuses him of prioritizing his desire for a Hong Kong ID over their situation. The man justifies his desire for the ID, explaining that it represents freedom, specifically the ability to travel easily. Yang still can't fathom why she intentionally wants to be married to Edward. Before they part ways, he reassures her that once he gets his permit, they'll file for a divorce, breaking whatever ties they have. Yang and Fong continue to spend time together, working on the necessary steps to process his permit. The man guides Fong in writing a letter, dictating the content, and even specifying the type of pen to use, a black ink pen, to add an air of authenticity. They also prepare for an upcoming interview at Fuzhou, and Yang takes the opportunity to learn more about Fong's family. The woman shares that she has a strained relationship with her parents and older brother, having moved out due to their disapproval of her high school relationship. This led her to enter into a sham marriage with Yang, enabling her to afford rent. She mentions her previous residence in Prince Edward, a place named after a man who sacrificed his throne for love, and humorously notes that people often refer to her fiancé Edward as her Prince Edward. Fong shares her upcoming travel plans with Edward, mentioning a trip to Fuzhou, China with Yi. Edward asks why she is going there, and she tells him that one of Yi's friends has invited them. Hearing this, the man lets it go without any further inquiry. He then proceeds to tell her that his mother has scheduled their wedding banquet for September 10th, shocking poor Fong, who is noticeably unenthusiastic. Fong and Edward's shopping trip with his mother takes a dramatic turn when Edward finds a marriage certificate in Fong's bag while taking her photo. The man roughly drags her down to his office and shuts the door. He then confronts her and demands to know who Yang is. The tension builds. Edward's anger and sense of betrayal are quite visible. His staff hastily ran off to leave the couple alone. Fong, still trying to maintain her composure, is met with Edward's relentless questioning. Edward's feelings of betrayal and hurt are boiling over, making him assume things like did she sleep with him or not. Edward's accusations cut deep, and Fong's denials only seem to reinforce his suspicions. The fact that she kept this secret from him has shattered his trust, and he's now questioning everything about their relationship. After a last attempt at reassuring him, Fong leaves, so that she can return the dress. After the shopping is done, Fong says that she still has work to do. She reassures Mrs. Yang that everything is okay when she expresses concern. Fong then heads back to the plaza, while Edward returns home with his mother. Later that night, Edward gets up to play video games. Fong checks on him and tells him to move away from the TV, as he's too close to it, but he ignores her. She sits next to him and mentions she's working on the divorce. Fong reassures Edward that she wants to get married to him as soon as possible and that she's in love with him. Her words touch Edward's heart, and they share a passionate kiss. The next day, Fong gets up early to go out. Edward wakes up to find her all dressed up and gets curious. He begins to ask questions. As if insecure now, he inquires if she's dressed up to go see Yang, and that she only dresses casually when she goes out with him. She informs Edward that she is dressed only because she has an interview with the Public Security Bureau. Just as Fong leaves, Edward gets dressed and follows her. He meets the two outside and is upset that Fong didn't inform him how young Yang is. Yang introduces himself to Edward, but Edward pulls Fong by the arm, wanting to take her away. Yang and Edward get into a struggle, and Edward threatens to call the police on him for harassment. However, Yang is still legally her husband, so he boasts, further enraging the poor jealous man. After a little scuffle, the two finally board the bus, leaving the tumultuous encounter behind. Fong's mind reels, overwhelmed by the events unfolding around her. Later, they step into a quaint restaurant, recommended by Yang, where they settle in for a steaming bowl of noodles. As they sit, Fong realizes she's without internet access, a catch she unexpectedly welcomes. Following the interview, Fong and Yang head to his girlfriend Xiaomei's residence, where they're greeted with warmth and hospitality. Xiaomei's beaming smile and receptive nature put Fong at ease. However, the tranquility is short-lived as the night wears on and Fong finds herself struggling to sleep amidst the heated argument between the couple. The crux of the dispute lies in Yang's reluctance to commit, while Xiaomei drops a bombshell. She's pregnant. The argument spills outside, where Yang seeks refuge in a cigarette, right beside Fong, and soon, Xiaomei appears. Fong eventually arrives home, where she and Edward begin to fill out the invitations. Edward is still restless and on edge. He asks Fong to promise that she will never contact Yang again, and she agrees. The next day, Yang makes an unexpected request to Fong at work, asking for an emergency photo of her in a wedding dress. Luckily, Fong's job at a bridal shop makes it easy for her to slip into a dress and snap a quick picture, which she sends to Yang. Meanwhile, Edward's preoccupation with his phone renders him useless at work. Later, he helps Fong close up the shop and they head home together. That night, Yang messages Fong, revealing his uncertainty about their fake marriage. With his permit still pending and no guarantee of approval, he's considering abandoning the plan. He asks for more time to think, apologizes for disrupting Fong's wedding plans with Edward, and hints at his own confusion and indecision. Fong, sensing more delay in the divorce finalization, suggests proceeding with the wedding. This just causes tension with Edward. Her proposal to stage a fake marriage certificate signing to appease his mother only exacerbates the situation. Edward, feeling hurt and betrayed, accuses her of changing since meeting Yang. Fong retaliates, claiming Edward never truly understood her. She shares a list of grievances, including his tendency to mansplain, invade her privacy, control her choices, and his mother's overbearing influence. However, instead of listening attentively, Edward places his hands over his ears and starts shouting loudly, like a spoiled child, frustrating the hell out of the woman. The argument is interrupted by a neighbor who reminds them to keep the noise down. People have kids who need to go to school the next day. Despite the intense disagreement, Edward still shows his toxic affection by cuddling Fong as they sleep. The next day, Fong and Yang cross paths at a store, where he tells her the latest news. He's no longer waiting for the one-way permit, and has decided to marry Xiaomei. Fong, recalling Yang's previous wisdom about not rushing into marriage, is surprised by his sudden change of heart. Yang says that circumstances have forced him, leaving him little choice but to take responsibility and marry her. Hearing him, Fong confides in Yang about her doubts regarding her marriage to Edward, admitting she may not be in love with him. Yang offers a reassuring perspective, sharing his observation of Edward's genuine concern for Fong during their trip to Fuzhou. However, Fong clarifies that Edward's behavior was driven by mistrust, not worry. Yang advises Fong not to overanalyze her feelings, cautioning her that being single isn't as glamorous as it seems. He encourages her to appreciate the stability and love Edward offers, even if it may not be passionate love. Later, Yang and Fong's fake marriage comes to an end with a divorce, marking a new chapter in their lives. Fong's last day at the bridal shop arrives, and as she leaves work, she runs into Mabel, who has come to return her wedding dress. The two finally let go of their past grudges and strike up a conversation, walking together. Fong returns home to discover that Mrs. Yang has given away her beloved tortoise, leaving her feeling upset and disregarded. The loss of her pet is painful, but what hurts more is the disregard for her opinion and autonomy. She confronts Edward, expressing her concerns that if they get married, she'll lose the freedom to make simple decisions, like keeping a pet. However, Edward dismisses her concerns, failing to understand the significance of the tortoise to Fong. He says that they'll have children together, and that should suffice. Edward's attempt to comfort Fong falls flat, and she remains unconvinced about their future together. The next morning, Edward tries to make amends by surprising Fong with a new tortoise, but she's nowhere to be found. He frantically calls and searches for her, only to be ignored. Unbeknownst to him, Fong has already left, turning off her location and escaping on a bus. Fong finds solace with Yang and Xiaomei, who welcome her with open arms. As she and Yang sit to talk, she tries to give Yang a bundle of money, but when he rejects it, she hands it to Xiaomei as a gift. Yang congratulates her on her supposed marriage, but she remains silent. She doesn't correct him or share her news. Instead, she bids farewell and walks away. Fong finds herself at the restaurant Yang introduced her to. There, she sits alone, nursing a bowl of noodles, as her phone buzzes incessantly with messages from Edward. She ignores them. The movie ends with Fong taking time for herself, savoring the simplicity of life and the joy of being alone. She's not running away from her problems, but rather embracing a new chapter, one where she gets to rediscover herself and find her own happiness.